Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about a very important, I would say, development as far as US-Pakistan relationship is concerned, and that is about a report or rather a recommendation sent by the Republican decision makers, the top-notch, I would say, people who really make the difference as far as the global politics is concerned. These 23 Republicans have said that they should review the overall conduct and overall kind of engagement of Pakistan ever since this war on terror started, when the Americans in fact attacked Afghanistan in the first month of October, exactly I would say 20 years ago. Now, interesting part was that whatever Pakistan has done, the kind of sacrifices Pakistan has given, I mean, there is nothing parallel to it. You talk about 80,000 human lives that were lost. You talk about $160 billion that were just consumed in this war on terror, and the overall image of Pakistan, despite whatever we could have done, we did it. Our military forces, the men in uniform, they made sure that all these terrorists should be flushed out of Pakistan, and they did that. But interestingly, the situation in the neighboring country, Afghanistan, was pretty fluid, remained fluid because of the American presence. And once the withdrawal took place, Pakistan was scapegoated, as we mentioned earlier also, that the Americans are trying to put the entire blame of their failure on Pakistan. And again, perhaps another technique to make sure that Pakistan should do what the Americans want them to do. They are, in fact, using this technique of arm twisting. Perhaps at some stage there could be sanctions, or maybe a review every year. FATF is still there. There are so many other issues, they are still pending. IMF is going to play a very major role, because it is not only about the kinetic pressure that any country can put. Now, we have also learned that there are two major important, in fact, demands of the Americans. One is to delay the recognition of the Taliban regime. The second is about the orders to provide the airspace for the American jets or the drones or the missiles if they want to attack Afghanistan. Now, these are the two major demands. And again, as they always say, that that mantra of do more. Now, what do they expect us to do more? We have done whatever we could have done. Now, the America should understand that the global dynamics have changed. It's no more a unilateral world. It's a multipolar setup. And this unilateral decision making of the Americans, whether to attack Afghanistan or to withdraw from there without the consent of the NATO, again says a lot. And this has raised a lot of eyebrows in the European Union also. Now, to talk about this, before I introduce you to our panelists, we have prepared a report. Let's watch that.
States, the champion of maintaining the realistic and unilateral world order in the world, remained engaged in aligning and positioning its strategic decisions in order to maintain its hegemonic positions in the international arena. The United States' strategies remained infested with power acquisition as well as its expansion. However, since the Cold War ended, the United States aligned the world towards another world securitizing agenda, global war against terrorism. In this realm, the invasion of Afghanistan proved to be the most haunting strategic blunder for the United States. The humiliating exit of the United States from Afghanistan and the resulted gap strengthening Pakistan, China and Russia's strategic position in Afghanistan is perceived to be a magnanimous strategic blow in the United States' national security imperatives, specifically the securitizing of the Indo-Pacific Ocean. Despite being the strategic partner of the United States in the 1979's war, as well as in the global war on terrorism, the United States' tendencies to scapegoat Pakistan for every strategic blunder in Afghanistan is increasing with every passing day. The latest graceless act in this regard was Afghanistan Counterterrorism Oversight and Accountability Bill, which was moved by the 22 Republican senators in the United States Senate. The bill demanded that the sanctions must be imposed on the Taliban and the persons assisting the Taliban in Afghanistan. In this bill, Pakistan was singled out in the section calling for a report on entities providing support for the Taliban. This blame game of the United States is a mere covering of the humiliation of the chaotic exit from the Afghanistan and failure of their own trained and equipped 300,000 plus Afghan security forces. This bill was rebuked by Human Rights Minister Sheri Mazari, and she said that it is the time for those powers who were present in Afghanistan Pakistan to look into their failures instead of targeting Pakistan, which paid a heavy price in terms of lives lost, social and economic costs. Such bills are actually the retaliations against Pakistan's increasingly growing geostrategic importance in the region and Prime Minister Imran Khan's assertiveness regarding not clearing the United States' strategic mess in Afghanistan and not acting as a hired gun for the United States anymore.
And now to talk about it, we have with us in our studio on my right is Air Vice Marshal retired Ikramullah Bhatti Senior Analyst. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. And we also have with us Dr. Manzoor Afridi Saab, expert on foreign affairs and especially on one issue. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. And we also have with us Masood Khalid Saab, former ambassador, who's joining us on Skype. Masood Khalid Saab, pleasure to have you, sir. Thank you so much for your precious time as well, sir. AVM Saab, now to start off with this typical I would say a campaign, let me call it a campaign, against Pakistan after the meeting of Quad, and especially when the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met the US President. And we got to know that 22, 23 Republican lawmakers, they have come up with this idea, and they have also presented a very comprehensive document or a dossier, whatever you may call it, in which they have said that Pakistan should be asked about the role before the war on terror, during the war on terror, and post-war on terror. Now, interestingly, sir, whatever we have done and the kind of, I think, maturity Pakistan has shown during the withdrawal time, I think there's nothing parallel to that. But still, after doing so much, sir, Pakistan has been scapegoated. Pakistan is being blamed by the Americans for the entire failure. Forget about the statements coming from General Mullen or otherwise, sir, which are pretty clear that this was their own fault. They had no planning during the war, they had no planning before the war, and they had no idea what to do once they decided that a certain date has been announced regarding the withdrawal of the US forces. Your take, sir. Let's start from there.
Well, eventually we have seen that the Americans chose to negotiate with Taliban and then execute a withdrawal. And interestingly, Pakistan had been saying the same thing to the Americans right from the outset in 2001 and all the way till the withdrawal took place, that the Americans need to negotiate with the Taliban. But for whatever reason, the Americans did not see it prudent enough to take this advice, and it was eventually in 2018 that they finally decided to start to talk with the Taliban. And of course, the biggest hurdle in that negotiation was the Kabul regime, and unfortunately the Americans could not prevail upon the Kabul regime, and they could not execute the agreement that they had made with the Taliban, and hence the withdrawal had to be without any political settlement, because had that happened, the withdrawal would have been far more orderly and organized, and the awful scenes that we saw would not have taken place. And when we come to the this document or this recommendation from these Republican senators, the fact, as you listed in your intro, that Pakistan has sacrificed or lost next to Afghanistan the maximum in these last 20 years, and eventually when Pakistan completed its operation against the terrorists in the bordering areas that border Afghanistan, all the remnants of the terrorists escaped into Afghanistan, and they stayed there for 8 to 10 years, and the audience would recall that it was in 2011 that Mullah Fazlullah escaped to Afghanistan, and ever since he undertook operations against Pakistan. It was only 7 years later, despite several complaints by Pakistan, that the Americans eventually killed him in a drone strike. And it stands to reason that the Americans must have known his location, They have all the resources in the world to carry
Talk
out
about Mullah
reconnaissance.
Mansoor Akhtar.
Yes. So the Americans knew their location, yet they allowed them to continue to operate, and it was under their watch that the Indians set up so many consulates in Afghanistan, especially in the border areas, whereas they have no such interest in Afghanistan. They do not have a common border with them, yet they ended up having such a large presence over there, and it was later on proved that those essentially were the launching pads for terrorists against Pakistan. And it all happened in America's watch. While the Pakistani armed forces undertook operations, single-handedly constructed that fence, prevented the cross-border free movement that was happening earlier on, the Americans did not honor the interests of Pakistan, and it continued to suffer. And as we just counted, 80,000 lives lost, $160 billion economic loss. And of course, right now when we look at the document, we need to see that do the Americans still have some interest in Pakistan, or they would like to go ahead and implement that document and maybe follow it up by some sanctions. The fact remains that the Americans still are dependent upon Pakistan for evacuation of those Afghanis who have the special immigrant visa, who are the special immigrant visa holders. They have to go through Pakistan, and Pakistan has been providing that access. And then of course the Americans continue to utilize that corridor, the famous boulevard, for the last 20 years, from where the American aircraft have been going through in the western region of Pakistan into Afghanistan to carry out operations. The agreement is still there, and the Americans are still using that corridor, and it is their requirement, it is their necessity. And at the same time, the Americans would not like to abandon the region altogether. They would still like to have some presence, so that they can continue to watch over China, they can continue to watch over watch the region, Middle East and Central Asia. So Pakistan is still very relevant for the US, and while they would like to, of course, scapegoat Pakistan, and they want to analyze or study or scrutinize the role of Pakistan in last 20 years, but they cannot ignore the loss of life that Pakistan was subjected to, the economic hardships that Pakistan was subjected to, and of course when we look at the America's role in Afghanistan, that despite having raised an army of 300,000, despite spending 2.26
who is to be blamed for that? Not Pakistan.
Yes. So
whether you talk about that, sir, or even otherwise, I mean,
there's a
there was
need
no
to
plan,
of course analyze their own undertakings that they've had in Afghanistan, and instead of looking at Pakistan to find a fault and then of course blame Pakistan for it.
All right. Now coming to you, Dr. Saab, one important factor, because I was listening to an interview and I got to know that when Mohd Yusuf Saab, the National Security Advisor, went to United States of America, he held some very important meetings, and even then he was in fact told that do not recognize the Taliban regime immediately, and number two was about this airspace that the Americans wanted, not the bases but the airspace to be used against the miscreants or those factors which still pose a threat to the United States of America, so that they can eliminate them. If you remember, sir, General McKenzie also mentioned that two of the senior Al-Qaeda members were killed during a drone strike when they retaliated after the bomb blast at the Kabul airport. And later on we got to know that these were all civilian casualties, including children and women. Now my point is, sir, it seems that the intelligence failure was actually at its optimum level, number one, throughout. Because when you talk about that the forces would be there to look after a couple of cities, that 300,000 is a huge number with that kind of assets and technology. And secondly, at the same time, sir, this started happening when the Taliban were taking charge and taking control in the west and in the north of Afghanistan. The American forces were still present. So didn't they see what was going on?
Faisal Saab, it is, I think, not the new method or strategy by the US administration, what they are saying today. It is a very old tactic, what they have used. And for the last 20 years, if we see, so United States, a sole superpower of the world, if US is there in Afghanistan alongside the NATO members, more than 40 countries are there with the latest technology, with axes everywhere, not only in Afghanistan, but the US axis everywhere in the world, economically, politically, culturally, and militarily. So if all these things, and even their own generals, if they are acknowledging the failure of the US forces, the US policies in Afghanistan, so now their politicians, their Republicans, senators, now they are blaming over Pakistan. Pakistan assisted there. Pakistan assisted them, and they assigned a title to Pakistan as a frontline state ally, as a non-NATO ally, and what Pakistan has sacrificed, more than 80,000 people, more than $150 billion, the infrastructure destruction, so many other things. The Pakistan's image it was deteriorated because of this war on terror throughout the world. It is a fact. So I think it is more than the international dimension what they are portraying. I think it's the internal politics what they are doing, the US internal politics. So everywhere in the world, especially in the US, if there is
the Trump administration or the Trump in general blames Joe Biden,
yes,
and Joe Biden blames Trump.
Trump.
The point is, sir, it was the American initiative to resume a dialogue with the Taliban. Whether they were recognized as a party or not, that's a separate chapter.
Yes.
It was Zalmay Khalilzad and the Taliban leadership, which met in Doha so many times, and in so many other countries also, including Russia, Pakistan, China, Turkey, you name it. I mean, the issue is now, again, sir, that if that was what was happening, I mean, were their eyes closed? They had no idea what was going on?
They were knowing all the things.
So?
And
who cut the deal?
Yeah, they were knowing the
Even
scenario.
Ashraf Ghani wasn't happy regarding the release of the prisoners.
How they can blame Pakistan, that Pakistan, for example, that whether Pakistan assisted Afghan Taliban before the war on terror or during the war on terror, or now Pakistan is assisting them, or in future maybe. So why they are asking these questions? For example, if just you said, if America sit down with the Taliban and American administration signed this deal, nobody can ask that why they are having this deal, and all the conditions without asking, without taking it into confidence of any country, including Pakistan, and by planning, by devising, by writing all the terms and conditions with the deal, it was the US administration. And if all these things done, now they are asking.
And they were dealing directly with the Taliban.
Yes, directly, by ignoring the Afghan government or
exactly.
the Ashraf Ghani, cabinet. And interestingly, now the section 202 of this bill, it is especially mentioning Pakistan. Okay, let me go back into the little bit about the history. So it is a tussle always between the Republicans and the Democrats in the US. When there was the era of Dwight D. Eisenhower, and he signed, 2 bilateral defense assistance agreements with Pakistan, and also C2 and CENTO with Pakistan 1954, 55, and then 1959. So that time, then John F. Kennedy, he was, campaigning for presidency in 1960. He was saying that if he would become the new US president, so he would favor India more than Pakistan. And he did in his 2 years term from 61 to 63. Now the same thing, it is repeating in the US. This tussle, internal politics, now they are glamorizing, and they are just making Pakistan is a scapegoat for the Afghanistan issue.
Quad is one example, AUKUS is another, sir, and so much more is going on. So if you allow me, sir, let me also bring in Ambassador Masood Khalid Saab. Masood Saab, a couple of, because I'm definitely going to ask you about the diplomatic point of view, about how to sort of respond to this. But sir, initially, the Americans, they needed to negotiate, we helped them. The Americans negotiated totally on their own, with their own agenda. You talk about Ashraf Ghani, you talk about Amrullah Saleh, you talk about Hamdullah Mohib. I mean, these characters practically vanished, ran away with the money, and now they are living in Dubai. And at the same time, Ashraf Ghani, while he was sure that he is going to fly out of Afghanistan, he in fact spoke to Hikmatyar, Abdullah, Hamid Karzai, and told them to go to Doha and, you know, make sure that whatever decision is taken there, I'll accept that, whether about my resignation or otherwise. And at the end of the day, he escaped, he vanished. Now, again, Pakistan is blamed for whatever happened in Panjshir, sir. Taliban had taken over almost entire Afghanistan, sir. This was bound to happen. And they would not need our support on those, you know, particular areas. But the Indian media, whatever they were saying at that time, that seems to be the language of this dossier or this document, whatever you may call it. So, your take.
Thank you very much. There is no doubt about that this resolution is scapegoating Pakistan. There is no doubt in my mind. But I think we should broaden the discussion a bit. This is, first of all, this is a very broad and, you know, quite a comprehensive resolution which they are planning to pass. But there are 3 or 4 elements which I think we need to know. First of all, there is a lot of, outcry and frustration within the United States on this abrupt withdrawal and this humiliation, actually, which the United States has suffered. Number 1. Number 2, within the domestic constituencies also of these senators and, you know, the congressmen, people are putting pressure on these congressmen because of this humiliating retreat from Afghanistan and, you know, this useless war. Thirdly, this is, as Mr. Afridi mentioned, this is also reflective of the tussle between the Republicans and Democrats. Now, Republicans are somehow trying to sort of cover up their failure because it was President Trump who negotiated with Taliban the February 2020 agreement, and then, you know, subsequent interaction with them. So these things are, these factors are quite important. I mean, these are the motivating factors. Then, if you read the bill, this is quite comprehensive in the sense that this is Pakistan specific, it is Taliban specific, it is China specific, it is Russia specific, and it, you know, it talks everything on practically on this earth. Now, as far as Pakistan is concerned, they want to, get reports on Pakistan's role over the last 20 years in respect of its, you know, so-called support to Taliban and this and that. Then it talks of Taliban and you know, says that they are still a terrorist organization, terrorist entity. Very paradoxical. They were talking to Taliban, they negotiated this agreement, Doha agreement, then their evacuation. Even now they are in touch with Taliban for the evacuation of the Americans. So this is typical, typical imperial hubris, I would call, arrogance, which drives American establishment, American Congress. We should be concerned on account of the provisions it contains, because if passed, although I doubt that it will be passed in its present shape, because there will be a lot of back and forth between the two sides of the Congress. And then in the Senate, there is a 50-50, seats between the Democrats and Republicans. Probably the casting vote is with the Vice President of the United States. But in between, I think the draft will be distilled. It may crystallize into some acceptable compromise document between the two sides, because I think for Biden administration also it is important that somehow they go by the content of this resolution for face saving. You know, I mean, Biden administration is under so much of criticism from all sides in America that they would like to probably accept some kind of sanitized version which targets Taliban, which targets Pakistan, which targets China and Russia. And you know, the bill also talks of India's role as to how much India has suffered in the process of Taliban's takeover and this new reality which has emerged in Afghanistan. So I think it is quite broad-based, it is comprehensive, it is in fact unwieldy if it is adopted in its present shape and form.
But
so
do you think this has been done you know, on the behest of the Indians, or the kind of pressure that was mounted on the current president of United States of America, Mr. Joe Biden, because the way the withdrawal took place, it was an absolute disaster. And on top, the bombing and killing of 13 US soldiers.
Absolutely.
So he has no answer to give to the nation. What about the 2,500 soldiers who got killed earlier in this war on terror? So many got, and what about the number of NATO forces? You know, at the end of the day, this is a problem.
That's right. Biden administration is under criticism from within home, from its European partners, NATO allies. So and then you said that India factor. I'm sure that the Indian, lobby in the United States worked very hard to draft this language, and it shows. I mean, if you go through the language, I at least see some kind of Indian hand, and this has come to so soon after Modi's visit to Washington. So I think there is a clear nexus between India and the United States. We should not live in illusions. And if you look at the history of Pakistan-US relations, you will find that there has been a carrot and stick policy, more stick than the carrots. So this time it's a stick which is dangling on our head. But I think we should be mentally prepared that these pressures will mount on Pakistan, these challenges will increase. This Wendy Sherman is coming, I think, on 7th and 8th October. After her trip, she will also be going to India. And I'm sure the Indians will try to, do as much brainwashing as they can do. And after that, but I think that will be an opportunity for Pakistan to really assess how the US administration, because they have a crucial role to play in this bill. So what will be their assessment? I think that is going to be important, how Sherman shares administration's perspective with our side. I think that is important. But we should be prepared that this can be quite, sort of dangerous. Although I find that it is so, unrealistic. The Taliban have taken over Afghanistan, and if the US wants the evacuation of its citizens from Afghanistan,
so this is their failure. Sir, we have always been saying that Afghanistan should have a political solution. War is not the right approach if you want to solve the Afghan problem. Now coming back to you.
But despite this humiliation and defeat, retreat, the Americans are hell-bent upon following the same old approach, which I think is not going to work. But I think Taliban also have to help themselves by taking certain steps so as to gain international legitimacy. That is also important.
All right, sir. Now, AVM Saab, another very important point, and that is about America is a superpower. There is no doubt. But, sir, that post of being number one at the top, unilateral kind of an approach, that's been challenged. And not been challenged by countries like China or Russia perhaps, by even Afghan Taliban. They were here to smoke them out and kill them. And eventually, after spending $2.2 trillion, they have left Afghanistan in a situation where the entire Afghanistan is controlled by the Taliban. Now, what a beautiful equation that is. As far as Pakistan is concerned, sir, I think the Foreign Office has been very categorical, and they said that Pakistan had facilitated the Afghan peace process we have done whatever we could have done, and then on top they said such measures are counterproductive for sure. Earlier, before the start of the program, you asked something very important. Is Pakistan still relevant? If I may ask you, is Pakistan still relevant? Because it seems that the Indians, along with this Western Bloc and the Americans, they really have a very, very serious issue of Afghan Taliban controlling that particular area, because that suits their adversaries. So, sir, why would they like to bring in peace in Afghanistan? I mean, after so many weeks and days, nobody was killed in Afghanistan, sir. Isn't that great news? Things are coming back to normal. Isn't that something acceptable to the entire globe? When we say people are dying of hunger and lack of medical facilities, is that more important, or inducting 2-3 women in their parliament is more important? So, your take.
Well, you see, success of Taliban will be America's failure. And in order to justify their 20 years presence and war and an expenditure of $2.26 trillion and loss of life of American soldiers, they have to continue to make Taliban look bad, look like terrorists. But then we have to go back to the post 9/11 situation, where the Americans essentially had come here hunting Al Qaeda, and to begin with, there was no proper investigation that this was Al Qaeda which did this, and it was the Al Qaeda which was placed in Afghanistan which did this. In any case, and anyway, the Americans invaded Afghanistan. They removed the Taliban government and set up a regime of their choice, and which remained there for 20 years. And then we saw that it was in America's watch that Daesh or ISIS took hold, gained strength, started to operate not just in Afghanistan, but also ended up making cross-border attacks into Pakistan.
Correct.
It was happening under America's watch. And America, having stayed there for 20 years, could not dislodge or eliminate Al Qaeda.
They used to make a lot of claims, though, even in 2010, 11, 12.
And today, when we say, is Pakistan still relevant for the for America, or do the Americans still have some interest in Pakistan? I think, besides other 2-3 issues that I talked earlier, the existence of Al Qaeda or ISIS in Afghanistan, and if Afghanistan continues to remain restless or is not governed properly, then Al Qaeda or IS is going to gain strength, and it is going to start to pose a threat to the Western world, especially the US. And I think the US is well aware of this. And when we talk of relevance of Pakistan or the US interest in Pakistan, I think beside other things, the presence of IS in Afghanistan, the threat of its gaining strength and being a source of concern for the US, I think is going to be a major point of interest, where the US would like the support and involvement of Pakistan. So I think the interest.
What sort of a support are you talking about, sir? What would they like Pakistan to do now?
Well,
the next chapter of the Do More mantra.
Well, you see, first of all, I said that they will continue to like to have that air boulevard, the air passage.
Can they violate if Pakistan doesn't allow them?
No, Pakistan will have to take a decision on this, that because there is an agreement that exists.
So what will that mean between the relationship, as far as Taliban and the government of Pakistan is concerned, sir?
Well, Pakistan will have to take a considered decision. As of now, the agreement, to my knowledge, holds. As of now, the Americans are using that corridor. As of now, whatever air operation does take place in Afghanistan, or that has taken place in Afghanistan, it went through that corridor. I mean, the aircraft taking off from Middle East, flying through that corridor into Afghanistan. So Pakistan will have to take a decision. Should that corridor continue to exist? But of course, it will be
What would be the fallout factors, sir, for Pakistan? The worst case scenario, just in case.
look.
Is it
I think
going to harm the relationship between the Taliban and the government, sir?
you see, the point of interest over here is that elimination of Al-Qaeda is in Pakistan's interest as well. And it is the interest of Taliban as well.
Why would I believe, sir, and why should I believe actually, you know, when they say their own general, the command, structure, if you look at that, that's huge. The central command, commander, I would say, is General Mackenzie, right, sir? And if he says that, I was informed and then this strike was perhaps on the Al-Qaeda members, and yes, we've been able to kill 2 top Al-Qaeda members. What sort of an intelligence, what sort of an operation was that, sir, where 10, 12 civilians were killed and later they admitted it? Now, that's the point. I mean, they should trust us rather than their own intelligence. That was an absolute failure in Afghanistan.
Well, of course, if some operations have to take place in Afghanistan and the Afghan Taliban are not in a position or they do not have the capacity to undertake that operation in terms of intelligence, in terms of firepower, in terms of logistics, then if that corridor is to be used, if the Americans are to employ their forces for a particular operation against IS, I think a much bigger scope will have to be resorted to. Pakistan and the US and even Taliban will have to engage each other and work collectively. And I think that is how the Americans can address this issue.
Afridi Saab, do you think that the regime of the Taliban, I mean, it's just too early to ask, but will they stay? Because when you talk about the financial sort of a support, money has been frozen, IMF twisting is going to be there, not only for Afghanistan, for Pakistan also. But currently we're talking about Afghanistan. So you think this regime can continue to be in parts, or you believe that eventually if there is a problem regarding food shortage or law and order or perhaps something similar, this could lead, because latest bombing in Jalalabad or Kabul or otherwise, the other day there was another bomb. If this continues and for some reason some external hands keep supporting the non-state actors and this eventually leads to a full-fledged civil war, sir, do you think that is going to be the situation that would suit India? Because stability doesn't suit India, sir. So the cases with the Americans, no matter whatever they claim, they have their own agenda, own perspective. Your take, sir.
2 things are important. One, that is the international groupings. So even it is in the interest of the international community, the United Nations, all the major stakeholders, the major powers, rising China, Russia, so many other powers, that there should be stability in Afghanistan, whether that is the Taliban government or anyone else. But no doubt that today there are Taliban in the power. So it should be there for the stability and peace of the Afghan people and Afghan side. If it doesn't, and if it doesn't take place, then like Russia, China, Iran, maybe Pakistan, Turkey and some other countries, maybe the Central Asian republics, they join hands together and they can have some kind of, economic formula for Afghanistan. Okay, so it is possible in future. Second thing is that, just we suppose if there are economic sanctions on Afghanistan, or most of the international community, they don't recognize the Taliban government in Afghanistan. And with the support of the external elements, countries, intelligence agencies, they use their proxies for their own interests, like they have done.
Which is most likely to happen.
Most likely to happen, yes. Then there is a chance, God forbids, of the civil war. But if this civil war happens, of course there will be more food shortage, more famine, more drug trafficking, and more the influx of Afghan refugees, mostly to Pakistan and to some other countries as well, Central Asian republics or the European countries or Iran, like that. So then again it's a problem. So if America, NATO forces, they fought in Afghanistan, and at last they came to the political solution and the table talk. So then why they have to waste other, another episode of 20 years in future? By this I mean that even it is in the interest of international community to support them, right, to have stability over there, because this domino effect or spillover effect, it will continue. It will not only suffer the Afghan people, soil, the Taliban, the government of Afghanistan, but other countries, Pakistan, no doubt, Iran, or some other countries, even European countries, even US as possible, because ISS or some other militant organizations, they can gain more power.
If something happens, not at the magnitude of 9/11, or perhaps something similar, even at a smaller scale,
regional level,
the Americans or the West would have a reason again to, hit back on the Taliban or the other.
And look, America is in Middle East, America is in South Asia,
They're everywhere.
America is everywhere in East Asia and Central Asian republics, but two areas are very important. There is turmoil in Middle East, Central Asian republics, right, important for US, and the Indian Ocean or the Indo-Pacific and the
that is exactly the new name of the game. Sir, because I was totally running out of time, but last few minutes for Ambassador Saab. Ambassador Saab, 2 questions you need to answer. Tackling the anti-Pakistan bill in the US Senate, sir, what do you think we need to do, number 1? And when we talk about the Pakistan-US relations, sir, do you still see a very bumpy road ahead?
We should realize and acknowledge and accept that instability in in Afghanistan is going to be a very serious thing for us, because Pakistan will be the most affected country. The refugees, because of linguistic links, ethnic links, religious links, they will come in our direction. They will not go in the direction of Central Asian republics, or for that matter towards Iran. This is number 1. I think we should not be complacent. But at the same time, because you would recall the Secretary of State Blinken, and 2 days ago, Mr. Milley, the general, he said at the hearings that we will assess the role which Pakistan has played. So that is the sentiment we should be aware of. We should not be complacent, but at the same time, we should not raise the anti-American or anti-US pitch in Pakistan, because we should not try to infuriate or, sort of make them more angry, or, so this is very important. At the same time, because this bill also targets China, also targets Russia, and it talks, a bigger role what China is doing in this region in terms of infrastructure projects, even targeting CPEC and BRI. So I think we need to coordinate with these 2 important countries. Now, as far as what can we do, I think I am not really competent to answer that, because what is happening in Washington in terms of Pakistan's lobbying and reach out, I'm not sure. I'm sure that our embassy and our ambassador, they are working 24/7 on this project, and they are the best ones to tell. But I think we need to sensitize the American administration. When he comes here, I think we'll do that this is not in US interest to antagonize Taliban, because they will become more rigid and they will react. And their reaction is not going to be, something which is going to favor American interest in that country in long term. So I think Americans are playing not a wise game. It's not a wise approach, and this is typical of Americans. They don't plan much. They sort of, react.
All right. Thank you so much, sir, for your comments. Ibn Saab, it was a pleasure having you, sir. Thank you so much, Afridi Saab, for your presence as well. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you, inshallah, again on Monday. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.